Right. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, Rachel. Rachel. Am I saying it right?
You could say however you want. It doesn't bother me.
Okay. Rachel. That's how I'm going to say it. Rachel with a capital.
Okay.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom, Brother Wesley. From the Anglo-Saxon. From the Anglo-Saxon.
Anglo-Saxon? I'm Latin. Latin. That's the farthest thing away from Anglo-Saxon.
Oh, I know. You're Brazilian. I know. Just the hairiness.
Man.
All right.
Because I'm white, that's racist.
All right. Before we get carried away. I feel it. So we gotta kind of, and then Mike, turn on this video.
Shalom.
Shalom.
It's recording actually right now, by the way.
Oh yeah. Okay. So let's all right. Hebrews chapter 8. We're looking at Hebrews chapter 8. There's 13 verses, but these 13 verses is pretty deep. Wish you was there, Mike, when we went over chapter 7 with Melchizedek. Brian really enjoyed that.
I was there.
No, not in the beginning. I think it took. Oh, come on. Shabbat shalom, Abby.
Where are we in Hebrews? I forgot.
Hebrews chapter 8.
Okay, that's what it was. Okay,
Shabbat
cool.
shalom, Aliyah. All right. So what are we doing? Hey, Aliyah. Still don't understand that.
Israel.
All right. So who wants to read the first 6 verses of Hebrews chapter 8?
I'll go for it.
Dom, you okay right now?
Yeah, I'm good.
Is that your pots and pans?
Nah, that was
me. That was me. My bad.
Oh, okay.
My mic was on.
This is your night to work in a restaurant, Wesley?
No. Erica's just moving some dishes.
Man, it sounded like a whole restaurant kitchen exploded.
It's just one pot. It's just one pot.
Nah, that wasn't.
All right, so Hebrews chapter 8.
All right. Hebrews chapter 8, the first 6 verses.
I'll read it.
Thank you, Dom.
All ready?
Yeah, go ahead, brother.
All right. Now of the things which we have spoken, this is the sum. We have such an high priest who is set on the right hand of the throne of the majesty in the heavens, a minister of the sanctuary and of the true tabernacle, which the Lord pitched and not man. For every high priest is ordained to offer gifts and sacrifices. Wherefore it is of necessity that this man have somewhat also to offer. For if he were on earth, he should not be a priest, seeing that there are priests that offer gifts according to the law, who serve unto the example and shadow of heavenly things. And as Moses was admonished of God when he was about to make the tabernacle. For see, saith he, that thou make all things according to the pattern shewed to thee in the mount. But now hath he obtained a more excellent ministry, but how much also he is the mediator of a better covenant, which was established upon better promises. That's it.
All right, good. Is there anything you see that stands out? Anything you want to emphasize on, or any question?
I kind of was like just reading, so like nothing really. The only thing that really stuck out to me was verse 6, where it says, "But now hath he obtained a more excellent ministry, by how much also he is the mediator of a better covenant, which was established upon better promises." So, what does that mean?
No, that's an excellent verse. Let me let Wesley go, and then we're gonna touch on that. Remember, if I don't touch on it, remind me. Verse 6.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Wes.
You can touch on that before. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. No. Go ahead. What are you gonna point out?
I was just going to point out the found to the example and shadow of heavenly things, as Moses was admonished of Elohim when he was about to make the tabernacle. For see, saith he, that thou make all things according to the pattern showed to thee in the mount. So these things that they were speaking of in previous verses, referring to the high priest that offered gifts and sacrifices, those were just shadows or the figure of the real or the reality of these things that were supposed to be, that was in heaven, heavenly ordained. Hence why those are the things in previous verses we were reading. Those are the things that the Messiah came and brought the reality of, or fulfilled.
Right. Absolutely. The shadow of things. He obviously he's referring to the earthly tabernacle. He's referring to the earthly priesthood. Where do we see? Because we see in verse 4, verse 3 and 4.
Verse 4, yeah.
3 and 4, it says for every high priest is ordained to offer gifts. The gifts is referring to offerings and sacrifices. Therefore, it is a necessity that this man have somewhat to offer. So these shadows of these offerings do resemble the offering that the Messiah had to offer. That's why it says that there still is a necessity of an offering, of a sacrifice, and I like the fact that it says this man have somewhat also to offer, because he's not offering a sin offering for himself, but he definitely is offering a sin offering. And then it says in verse 4, for if he were on earth, he would not be a priest, which we know that the Messiah was not a priest, seeing that there are priests that offer offerings or gifts according to the Torah, referring to the ones that he had to offer for his own sins. And the shadow, I think this is very important, because let's look at Hebrews chapter 7. There's a verse in Hebrews chapter 7 that I think that we have to bring over this thought into chapter 8 as well. So Hebrews chapter 7, verse 11. Hebrews chapter 7, verse 11. It says, if therefore perfection were by the Levitical priesthood, for under it the people received the law, what further need was there that another priest should arise after the order of Melchizedek and not after the order of Aaron? Let me put the perspective. That another priest should rise after the order of Melchizedek, old priesthood, and not called by the order of Aaron, newer priesthood. So I want to put those in the correct spectrum. Melchizedek is an older priesthood. Aaron is a newer priesthood than the Melchizedek priesthood. But it says here in verse 12, because the priesthood being changed, there is made a necessity, a change of the law. So when we go back to chapter 8, we see the change. Verse 6. Now have he obtained a more excellent ministry, by how also he is the mediator of a better covenant, which was established upon better promises. The covenant that was established on better promises was the one established before Levi. The promise that he said, I will have a nation, a kingdom of priests, is the promise that he's fulfilling through the Melchizedek priesthood. He did not fulfill the nation of priests through the Levitical priesthood, because obviously it was a necessity that only through that fleshly commandment, through that shadowy commandment, it was necessary that only one tribe was able to have priests. That's why it says in where do we read it? Oh, verse 4. If he were on earth, he should not be a priest. So according to the law that pertained to the Levitical priesthood, the Messiah could not be a priest according to the Levitical priesthood. So what did he have to do? He had to complete it. He had to fulfill it. He had to become what the Levitical priesthood represented, which is why verse 5 says that these priests served as an example. The priests and the sacrifices served as an example and shadow of heavenly things. And then it goes into how he told Moses how to set up this Levitical priesthood. He says, Moses was admonished by Elohim when he was about to make the tabernacle. For see, saith he, Yah said, you shall make all the things according to the pattern that I showed you on the mount. So Yah is very specific. He's like, make everything the way that I'm showing you, so it can have the correct representation, so it can represent what I want it to represent. Go ahead, Wesley.
Yeah, I just wanted to throw out a connecting verse. If you go to Hebrews 10:1, it says, for the law having a shadow of good things to come, and not the very image of the things, can never with those sacrifices which they offered year by year continually make the comers therefore unto perfect. So that was just a connecting verse showing that, again, it's referring to Levitical priesthood, or referring to the sacrifice and offerings as a shadow of heavenly thing, as they were just images.
Right. Absolutely. And then in verse 2 of Hebrews chapter 10, it says, because then they would not have ceased to be offered, saying that it wouldn't have stopped. If it was completed by the Levitical, it wouldn't have needed to stop. But it did stop. It did stop, because the Messiah, once and for all, I think we read that in is that in chapter 7, that he offered himself once and for all?
I believe that was 7. No, it was not 7.
No, it wasn't 7.
No, it was not 7.
Yeah, it did. Yeah, he did. It's chapter 7, verse 27. It says, who needed it not daily as those high priests to offer up sacrifice, first for his own sins, then for the people's, because this he did once when he offered up himself. It doesn't say once and for all, but it says he did it once. He offered this sacrifice once, and it was completed. But it does say once and for all. It's probably in chapter 8. But so we see that the better covenant is not necessarily something brand new that's coming. I want to also point that out as well. Let's look at verse 6. Now have he obtained a more excellent ministry, by how much also he is a mediator of a better covenant, which was established upon better promises. This is not saying that the covenant that he is now a mediator of is a new covenant, something that has not existed already. I think that's something that kind of throws people off with the whole, okay, old covenant is now gone, new covenant is now beginning, and being demonstrated now that Messiah is here. Messiah is actually obtaining a ministry that existed before. There's absolutely no way that a man can be a priesthood after the order of Melchizedek before the Messiah is a priest after the order of Melchizedek. It just wouldn't make sense in that formula. The priesthood was promised to the Messiah. We see that in Psalms chapter 110. So we're gonna look at Psalms chapter 110 after let Mike go. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, there's multiple times where Yahusha says that he's come with no new doctrine and no new commandments. He's always showing you that he's not coming with anything new, but stuff that was there from the beginning. So I'll pull those verses up. You can come back to me.
All right. Right. So there's no new doctrine that he was doing. What he was doing was restoring. When you look at the gospel that's being preached by the disciples in the book of Acts, there's this constant reiteration of restoration, of restitution, that the heavens must have the Messiah until the restitution of all things. That's in Acts chapter 3, verse 21. So we see that there's a restitution that's happening. There's a restoration that's happening, not a brand new created thing, or a brand new establishment. When we look at Psalms chapter 110, this is where we see the Melchizedek priesthood, but we also see a conversation that's happening between Yah and our master, the Messiah. So when you go to Psalms 110, we're going to start from verse 1. It says, Yah said unto my master, and most translations says, my Lord said to my Lord. The first Lord is Yah, is his name. The second Lord is master, my master. David is referring to the Messiah as his master. So he says that Yah said to my master, sit at my right hand till I make your enemies your footstool. One promise. And Yah shall send the rod of your strength out of Zion. Rule thou in the midst of your enemies. Second promise. Third promise, your people shall be willing in the day of your power, in the beauties of holiness, from the womb of the morning, you has the dew of your youth. Third promise, now we have another one. Yah have sworn and will not repent. You are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. Another promise. So this chapter is just filled with promises. Well, let's just read the rest. Verse 5, it says, this word in verse 5 is Adoni, or Adon, which means the master. This is not Yah's name. The master at your right hand shall strike through kings in the day of his wrath. So the master of Yah's right hand will strike through kings in the day of his wrath. He shall judge, the master shall judge among the heathen. He shall fill the places with the dead bodies, and he shall wound the heads over many countries. And he shall drink of the brook in the way. Therefore shall he lift up the head. So, and I believe that this is referring to his people, because he says that my people shall be the head and not the tail. So he will lift up the head. Or he, the master, our Lord, the Messiah, will lift up the head. So here we see, back to verse 4, that the promise was made to the Messiah. This is not new promises. Yah is not saying, he's not forgetting to make these promises to the Messiah until after he's born. These are things that he's making to the Messiah already, at his existence already. Messiah also used this verse 1, to emphasize how when David was alive expressing this psalm, that he was at that time referring to the Messiah as his master. Do you guys know where that is? Pop quiz.
I can find out in 2 seconds.
I was mistaken, by the way. That wasn't Yahusha saying that. I think that was Paul.
Saying what?
I come with no new
Right.
I come with no new doctrine.
Right. Paul
Matthew
said
22,
that.
42, 46.
Yes, thank you. Listen. In Matthew 22, 42 to 46, it says, what do you think of the Messiah? This is the Messiah speaking to the Pharisees. It says, while the Pharisees were gathered together, the Messiah asked them and said, what do you think of the Messiah? Whose son is he? And they said, he's the son of David. And the Messiah didn't say, you're right. There you go. You got it right. Even though prophetically and bloodline, yes, this is correct. But this is not the identity that he wanted to express. So in verse 43, he said, how is David in the spirit calling him master? Saying, and then he quotes Psalms chapter 110, verse 1. And he says, Yah said to my master, sit at my right hand till I make your enemy your footstool. So then the Messiah asks, if David is calling him master, how is the Messiah his son? And no one was able to answer him a word. And no one did after that. From that day forth, they didn't ask him any more questions. So we see clearly that the question of his identity is a current identity that he had. He didn't say that he was prophetically speaking of a future time in which the Messiah will receive a promise from the Father. He was saying that at that time in the spirit, he recognized that the Messiah at that time was his master. This is not I'm projecting a future scenario. So the Messiah received the promise of being that priest, having that covenant before the Levitical priesthood was fulfilled. I hope that's clear. So before the Levitical priesthood was fulfilled, the Messiah received these promises from his father. David acknowledged that Messiah was his master, and the Messiah was receiving the promises. So the better covenant, it says in verse 6, how much also he is the mediator of a better covenant. I want to focus on that also. When did he become our mediator? Because most people are looking at this verse and saying that he's becoming our mediator now that he's resurrected. And they take it from here. Anybody know where the verse is that speaks about Messiah being the mediator?
You talking New Testament?
Yeah,
Wouldn't that be in Genesis?
What will be in Genesis? I want to know what that thought is about.
I think I know.
When he was told to be the mediator, he would be the mediator. When he was walking, when they heard his voice in the garden.
Ooh, you getting deep now. Dom is getting deep. All right. Well, hold that thought right there, Dom, because we're gonna go back to that one. So that's exactly where I was gonna go. I was exactly gonna go there. So the New Testament verse is in 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 5, right? So 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 5, it says that there is one Elohim and one mediator. Everybody see that? 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 5.
Mm-hmm.
One mediator between Elohim and men. The man, Yahushua the Messiah. Right? One mediator. Why was there necessity for a mediator? There was a necessity for a mediator because of sin. What did sin do that there was a necessity for a mediator, someone to come in between? Let's look at the book of Isaiah. This is good because we need to be able to express this idea of a covenant, of a new covenant or a renewed covenant. So Isaiah chapter 59, verse 2. Isaiah chapter 59, verse 2. It says, your iniquities have separated between you and your God. Your sins have hid his face from you, that he will not hear. So the separation between you and your God is due to sins and iniquities. So sin and iniquity separates you from your God. So you have a scenario in the book of Genesis, like Dom says. Dom says that sin was first done by Adam, the first man, and the first woman. So if sin separates them between their God, so that means that the separation initially began in the book of Genesis. And it's interesting that it doesn't say that Yah came to them. It said something else, which Dom says. Dom, do you know where that verse is?
Hold on, let me see if I can find it.
Okay, it's in Genesis 3, Genesis chapter 3. So we see that sin is what's separating between man and God.
Verse 7.
Huh? Say that again?
Verse 9. Chapter 3, verse 9. Chapter 3, verse 9.
Well, chapter 3, verse 8 and 9.
And the Lord God called on. Yeah, 8 and 9. Yeah.
Right. So it says, and they heard the voice of Yah, Elohim, walking in the garden. The voice of him walking in the garden in the cool of the day. A voice doesn't work. Walk, sorry. The voices don't walk through the garden. So he says he heard the voice of Elohim, or the voice of Yah walking in the garden. The Messiah is referred to as the word of Yah. He's the word of God. He speaks on behalf of Yah. It says that nobody, John chapter 5, says nobody has heard his voice. Nobody has heard his voice or seen his shape at any time. So who is the voice?
Can I intervene?
Yeah. Go ahead, brother.
I'm sorry. I wanted to participate a little bit here.
Yeah, of course.
So basically, it's pretty clear that in the very beginning, that separation, the beginning of man, they interacted one-on-one with Yah.
Right.
So it's right there. So because of sin, that's where Yahusha comes in here. He has a sort of that bridge in between.
Absolutely.
You just mentioned the bush there. When Moshe was out there and Yah reached out to him, they were. Now, are you saying? Did I understand you correctly when you said? Are you saying that was Yahusha interacting with Moshe, or Yah in voice? I am. Everything else.
When you look at Exodus chapter 3, let's look Exodus chapter 3. When you look at Exodus chapter 3, verse 2, it tells you who is interacting with Moshe from the bush. It said, and the angel of Yah appeared unto him in the flame of fire out of the midst of the bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire, and the bush was not consumed. So you see that the messenger, the malak, the messenger, was in the bush, ready to deliver the message. The messenger was in the bush interacting with Moshe.
Right.
So
right, I had forgotten about the angel part there. It's been a long time.
But he understood that this entity, which I believe is Messiah, is the representation of his father. So they knew that when a representative comes to you, it's as if the king came to you himself. But we know due to sin that there was a disconnect. That's why there was a necessity for the mediator.
Since the very beginning.
From the very beginning. This is when sin came about. So this is when there was a necessity for a mediator. So we're looking at the covenant, the better covenant, the covenant with better promises. So what's happening is that there's a transition going from the figure or the shadow, which is the tabernacle, the earthly tabernacle. We're in Hebrews chapter 8. The earthly tabernacle, the earthly priesthood, into a better covenant, a better promise with better promises. And we just went over where some of these promises are located, such as Psalms 110 and things like that. But we also see that there's a restitution happening, that the Messiah is coming in between to create or to restore what was separated or what was severed, which is the relationship between Yah and his people. So Dom showed that that mediation that the Messiah took on actually occurred when Adam sinned. And we see that the voice of Yah was walking through the garden. It wasn't Yah himself, because Adam was in sin at the time. And his sin separated him from his God, according to Isaiah chapter 59, verse 2. You see, so the principles always remain. The principles never change for any circumstances. There's no way that it's going to be okay for a holy, set-apart God to be seen by sinners. This is why Messiah says nobody has seen him at any time. Messiah said that in John chapter 5, and John said it in John chapter 1, verse 18, where it says nobody has seen God at any time except the only begotten Son, who was from the bosom of the Father. He has declared him or proclaimed him. So it's the Messiah that's revealing Yah to all man. So back in those days, it was the Messiah that was proclaiming Yah to Moses. It was the Messiah that was proclaiming Yah to the prophets. It was Messiah that was revealing who Yah was to Abraham. You know, so it was always the Messiah that was directly involved with going in between Yah and man, and allowing man to recognize who Yah was, so he can work on ending the relationship. This is why it's a better covenant, because he's talking about a relationship. He's not talking about, you know, rituals. He's not talking about ceremonies and rituals. He's talking about a relationship. So this is the better covenant that he's been involved in restoring since the beginning of the fall.
What was that last verse there, Jadio? No one has intervened with the Father. What you were saying there? What verse was that?
That was John chapter 1, verse 18.
No one has.
John chapter 1, verse 18.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah. Mike.
Isn't there a place that says no man has heard the Father? Oh,
Yeah. Yeah, John chapter 5. I believe that's John chapter 5, verse 30. John chapter 5, verse 30.
It says no one's seen him or heard him.
Nobody heard his voice at any time, nor seen his shape. That's what Messiah said himself. Nobody's heard his voice at any time.
that's it right there, man. Nothing else to be said but that right there.
Right. is either the angels, or
that's solid. That's solid.
It was the messengers, or it was the head messenger, which is the Messiah himself. Hebrews chapter 1, verse 1, it says that Yah spoke to us through the prophets in the days of old, and he's now spoken to us in these last days by his son. His son is the chief head malachim, or messenger. Like nobody is more qualified to speak on Yah's behalf than the word of Yah himself. Go ahead, Mike.
Isn't there another? Oh, I'm sorry, guys.
Oh no, I'm gonna come right back to you, Will.
Okay. Yeah, and just to stay focused, also, like on the verses that we're reading right now on the mediator part, because I was just saying, like, my mind just went kind of left field for a minute, thinking about mediator, because I was like, well, wait, if that's Yahusha in the beginning as well, that would make him, the high priest also in the beginning as well,
Of course.
because who sacrificed the, my mind was like, well, if we had the Levitical priesthood, when did he stop becoming? But it doesn't say that he did stop, because it says Hebrews 6. But now we have obtained a more excellent ministry, by how much also he is the mediator. It doesn't say that now he is. It just says that he is the mediator of, and was there before. That means he was also mediator before, which is
Right.
the reason why it's a better covenant.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. What Mike is pointing out is verse 6 of Hebrews chapter 8. It says, how much more the excellent ministry that he went to obtain was the steps. He went from sacrifice. He had to perform the ministry of the sacrifice. And then he went to establish that to restore completely from the shadow into the restoration. It wasn't individual.
That's how he was able to sacrifice himself.
Right. Remember, yes, the priest has to
Otherwise, he's just dying.
right. The priest has to offer the sacrifice. So he was able to offer himself as the high priest.
God.
So it makes no sense. Like the lamb is not going to kill himself. The Father offered him, and he also offered himself. This is what Scripture is showing. He's offering himself. The Father is offering his Son. Son is being offered by the priesthood. You was going to say something, Wes?
No, I didn't. Nope, I didn't have my hand up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Another thing
Yeah.
that Mike mentioned was that it was already established, because when you look at Hebrews chapter 8 verse 5, there's a pattern that's in heaven already. There's a pattern that Yah is giving to Moshe of something that exists already. Wesley just read the verse in chapter, I believe he read from chapter 10, which he says that for the law having a shadow of good things to come and not the very image of those things. So what he was showing him was an imagery to represent what was in heaven, what was the reality. Everybody hear me?
Yeah, I was thinking about Abraham and Isaac. That's like where you just said about the father offering the son
Right.
offering himself. Yeah, that's
Right.
deep. That's deep.
Right. You see, Isaac was not no little kid like these cartoons portray. Isaac was carrying the sticks up the mountain. He could have overpowered Abraham if he wanted to. You see what I'm saying? But he trusted his father. It shows that he trusted his father not only to offer him as a sacrifice, but also to choose his wife. Like Isaac was a excellent demonstration of who Messiah is. He was also a representation of the promised seed, which was pointing to Messiah. Am I breaking up?
No, I can hear you. I can hear you fine.
Okay. Will, you wanted to say something?
No, I was just it's a lot of stuff we're talking about here.
Yeah.
But another verse that bounces here between my mind is that one verse is in John. Who has seen me has seen the Father.
Right. John chapter 14. So we know that we know that looking at him is not literally looking at the Father. We know that from John chapter 5, because he says nobody has seen him or heard his voice. You see that? So what does he mean when he says, if you see me, you've seen the Father? Right. But when you look at the context of John 14, he's not talking about looking directly at him. He's talking about looking at the works that is being done. So if we go to John chapter 14, starting from verse 9, just so we can clarify that nobody has seen the Father. So John chapter 14, starting from verse 9, it says, have I been so long with you, yet you have not known me, Philip? He that have seen me have seen the Father. How do you say, show us the Father? If you stop there, you can conjure up an idea that he's saying, I'm the Father, or something like that. But if you continue to read, look at this, verse 10. If you do not believe that I am in the Father, and the Father is in me, the words that I speak unto you, I do not speak of myself. There goes the separation again. But the Father that dwells in me, he does the works. It says, believe me that I am in my Father, and my Father's in me, or else believe me for the work's sake, because the works show that the Father is involved in what's happening. He says, verily, verily, I say to you, he that believes on me, the works that I do, shall he do also. Guess what that means? That means that when they see you and the works that you do, they see the Father as well. And he says, greater works than these shall he do, because I go to my Father. And whatsoever you ask in my name, that will I do, that the Father may be glorified in the Son. So we see that when he says, if you see me, you've seen the Father, he was referring to the things that he was saying and the things that he were doing. And then he says, and turns around and says, you're going to do those same things. So when people see you, they should know that the Father is with you as well, because you're going to do the same works and you're going to speak the same words.
That is an interesting phenomenon. That's just very interesting there, man. How that whole, that's as far as we can go, man. And
Right.
understanding that.
But you see how when you take one verse and then you stop, you can say 1,000 things about that one verse. Yep. You know.
Man, I tell you.
Restoration. This is what y'all is doing. Restoring his truth, restoring his people, restoring everything. Mike, you had your hand raised, and then JP.
Yeah, I was just gonna make a comment that it's the same as saying if you've seen the Torah, you've seen Yahusha.
Right.
Oh well, right. Yeah. It's you're not literally looking at Yahusha's face, but you're seeing
right.
something that's representing him. It's his exact expressed image.
Right.
Character, right. Personality.
Absolutely. And the thing that I love the most, he turns around and says that you're going to do greater works, meaning that the same Father that was doing the works he was doing was going to do the works through you as well. So when they see you, they'll see the Father too.
It's simple as he claims to be the son of Elohim and turns around and calls us sons and daughters of Elohim. If I'm a son and he's a son, he's calling me the same thing as him to the Father in that aspect. So it's like, if I'm going to say he's the Father, am I the Father to them because I'm also a son of the Father? You get what I'm saying?
No, right. The only reason why you're a son is because he's a son. So if his identity is now changed to the Father, what does that do with your identity?
Exactly.
Is either you get exalted to the Father or you don't even have an identity. Your identity was always fake, or a label, just a label. Like, no, we're sons. We're sons and daughters because the Son of Yah dwells in our hearts. It's the reality of things. Go ahead, JP.
Well, I was just saying with that conversation, it was interesting because I was thinking, well, in the next chapter, in chapter 15, we see that, verse 15, verse 5, I mean, you can read most, it's a beautiful chapter. But it says, I am the vine, you are the branches, he that abideth in me and I in him, the same bringeth forth much fruit. for without me, you can do nothing. And then I was looking at the next verse in John, back to John 14, verse 4. 14, verse 14. If you shall ask anything in my name, I will do it. And it's just like, I was just kind of thinking, like, you know, do we have in us, I know we got the Ruach, but is it like, I'm seeing it like more like you got Messiah in you,
Right.
and you and him, not so much the Father in you. If you were to separate them, you know what I'm saying? Unless there's verses that say the Father is in you also.
Well,
No,
yeah.
I'm not really sure. So that was
John,
something I was thinking about.
the vine, right? So you have the vine. The vine, the Messiah is the vine. We are the branches. We abide in the vine, and we will bear much fruit. But verse 1 of John 15 says, I am the true vine, and my Father is the husbandman. So the husbandman takes care of the vine then takes care of the branches. So there's never a disconnect. There cannot be a disconnect of the Ruach. It comes from the husbandman, which is the Father, into the vine, and the care that the husbandman puts into the vine then goes into the branches and bears fruit. So when we go to John chapter 14, he gives us the same statement, but he mentions in verse 23, it says, the Messiah answered and said unto him, if a man loves me, he will keep my words, which is the fruit. That's what fruit looks like when you obey his commandments. You will keep my words, and my Father will love him, and we will come unto him and make our home in him. So there you have the husbandman and the vine again, being the power of the branches, which is us, to bear fruit, which is obedience.
Right.
You know, so
so
there's never a disconnect of the Father. It's just that the Father, the Son will be the extension of the Father. When you go to Galatians chapter 4, it tells you again in verse 6, it says, because you are sons. So Galatians chapter 4, verse 6, it says, because you are sons, Elohim have sent forth the spirit of his Son into your hearts, crying, Abba, Father. So we have again the whole picture of the Father sending his Son into our hearts, and then we cry, Abba, Father. We are now sons to call him Father.
Right. I agree. I see what you're saying. But as far as a phrase or a statement someone may make, it would be more that Messiah is in you.
It would, yeah, they would emphasize.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
right.
biblical. You know what I mean? As far as Bible.
Mm-hmm. There would be
you
an
know
emphasis. I mean? There would be an emphasis because the Father makes that emphasis also. The Father says, you know, I'm going to send my Son to you. He says, I'm going to send you his Ruach. You know, so he even says, remember we were reading Philippians 2? There's an emphasis. I exalted him. I gave him a name that you call on his name now. You see what I'm saying? So the Father is emphasizing on the Messiah as well. You know what I mean? So we should also recognize it, but also understand it. If we get confused with you know, if we get confused with identity, we're not going to understand the ministry that he has. Because remember, in Hebrews chapter 8, it says that he obtained an excellent ministry. Like he's doing something. If we don't understand what he's doing, then we're not going to understand what our part is in that whole situation. You know, what are we supposed to be doing with him? What are we supposed to allow him to do? We don't even understand his ministry. How are we going to know what he's doing inside of us? You know.
All right. Yeah. No. Thank you.
JP. Wes. I know JP got some more. He's just not trying to. Wes, go ahead, brother.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in on the emphasis would be on the Messiah, but we cannot forget because there is verses that clearly state that the Father is in the Messiah and the Messiah is in us, which in conclusion, the Father is in us.
Right.
And there are verses like John 14:20. There's also, I believe, 2 Corinthians 5:19, which talks about it. So yeah, we can't leave one out,
right,
because the Bible does incorporate it all together.
right, right. So you can't exclude the fact that the Ruach belongs to the Father. Like the Father, there's only one Spirit, and it belongs to the Father. So which ones? You want to read those verses, Wes? Do you have it? Do you have it out?
Sure. John 14:20. It says, "At that day you shall know that I am in my Father, and ye in me, and I in you." And then also have, I think I said 2 Corinthians 5:19, which says, "To wit, that God was in the Messiah, reconciling the world unto himself, not imputing their trespasses unto them, and hath commuted unto us the word of reconciliation."
Right.
Those are the two I mentioned, but there's also Colossians chapter 1, verse 19 saying, "For it pleased the Father that in him," which is talking about Christ, "should all fullness dwell."
Right, right, right. In John 17, he also talks
17.
about you and me, and I and the Father in you. Yeah, there's this collaboration between the Father and Son involved in our transformation, in our salvation, in the redemption, in the removal of sin. Yeah, those are
And
good.
what's crazy is that this is the way I see it, is that the Messiah like stressed to say this multiple times, especially in the book of John. It wasn't just he said it once and it was done. It was multiple times in John 14, John 17, John 10. I think it mentions it as well. So
Right. JP
What's
came back.
fascinating?
Oh, sorry, Will. Go ahead, brother.
I'm not raising my hand, am I? Sorry about that, guys.
No, it's all right.
I got to get used to that.
It's all right.
You know, it's hard to change an old goat sometimes with his bad habits. I'm working on it.
That's all right.
So what's fascinating to me is how the Father and the Son is like kind of a separation as he roamed the earth and was doing his thing, his ministry. They're one, but they're separated to a sense, even at a spiritual sense, because Yahusha was always praying to the Father. You know, he was always praying. So and I envision in his glory to the right of him is the Son. So there's even still a separation, you know. So it questions that oneness deal that some people. What I've learned so far, that oneness is more of a connection, thing, more than just a one supreme being.
Absolutely, brother.
You know, because even in heaven, his Son sits to the right of him. There's another seat there. So if the story would tell me, no, once he went back, he went within himself, or if it went, there's nothing to the right of me. If the story would have read something like that, then I can work with the oneness a little more. And a sense of it being just one being. So that's just something that kind of crossed my mind there, and as we're discussing this when we talk about this, but there seems to always be a separation, even in his glory, between him and his Son, but yet they're together in a spiritual sense.
Absolutely. The same oneness that he's trying to manifest is the same oneness that he wants us to partake in. You know what I mean? There's still a separation, but there's a connection. And we just finished reading Acts chapter 7 on Wednesday. In the last verses, Stephen said he looked up and the sky opened up and he saw the Messiah at the right hand of the Father. Again, this is what he's seeing with his eyes. Not only did he see it, but then he told the people that was around him. You remember, we was reading it, So if the scriptures did not say it that way, we would have our own, we would have to trust our own, logic and reasoning, but we don't even have to do that. We could just read the word and see what it describes to us. And it describes a connection, but a separation. And that everything comes from one source, which is the Father,
That's beautiful there, man. I'll tell you,
It is beautiful. Awesome. It is beautiful because it involves us now. We're a part of that connection. When you have just this thing where only the Messiah is a part of and we're not, we're just looking at it from the outside, that's a disconnect from us. We're just watching them do their thing, but that's not what they want. They want to be involved with you. Sin has separated us. So now that Messiah came, to restore that, he is now bringing us back together, connecting us back into that oneness that man had with Yah as well. So it is beautiful to think of it as that type of restoration where we're no longer separate from our Elohim, from our Father. Let me let JP go and then Brian. Go ahead, JP.
So in conclusion, there is 3 in 1 in me.
There's 3 in 1?
Oh, because in me.
Oh, because you're the third one.
I'm the one.
I'm
the one. You know what I mean?
You love that Trinity, huh?
So hey, no, I'm just saying, like it is amazing in that sense. I'm like, I got that, like the brother West, he says it's amazing because he says if the Son is in the Father and we're in the Son, and it is in a way, like, I mean, I know it's not the same phrase they use, but
it is.
It's a 3 in 1. Is
as long as
it's amazing, you know what I'm saying?
As you're being involved, that's what makes it beautiful and amazing,
right?
But when we're just looking at
we're
looking at some mystical thing happening over there, that's when it disconnects us from just watching like a movie to being a part of an actual movement that Messiah is involved in. So yeah. I'll take that.
We're one with them, like we're one now with them. I don't even know how to talk no more sometimes. Like, I don't want to say it.
We're one big tree.
It's a beautiful vision in my mind where it solidifies as we talk about this and conversate about it, instead of trying to put it on the side like most people or most assemblies or whatever you want to say. They'll just want to say, nah, this is what it is.
Right.
But never try to break it down for everybody's minds to actually try to wrap your mind around it. So that's beautiful, brother.
Right. Absolutely. This is our Elohim. Like, why would we not? This is the most important doctrine ever. Like, Torah is secondary to who you're actually keeping Torah for. Like, you're keeping Torah because you love Yah. It's imperative that you know for sure who you're actually worshiping, who you're following, who's your master, who's your Elohim. You have to know that. Like, that's the most important doctrine. Or we're gonna be like other people with different ideas. When you have a different idea of Elohim, you have a different Elohim, period. You know what I mean? Now, Yah does give us that mercy where we can sit down and discuss it until we see what scripture actually says and stick to that. You know what I mean? Which is the beautiful part, because even though we have these ideas, he's still involved in getting us to that place where we understand. That's why we have to trust in the Ruach. We don't have to trust each other. I thank Yah that we don't have to trust each other for the understanding of doctrine. We can just talk to one another and see what the scriptures pull out, what stands out, You know what I mean? Well, Will was breaking down. That's not nothing. We didn't even say that. Will was saying something that he was getting from what someone was saying something else. And then you came in, you said something else. That's how we put it together. You know, if all of us are saying the same exact words when describing this understanding, that means that there's a brainwash somewhere. Everybody's saying the same exact phrase and the same script. Like, we don't need to do that. Everybody studies, and there's a plethora of verses to prove this understanding, you know, so we don't all have to say a script like most groups do. They say a script and they don't want to move from that script. Like, nah, we're free from that. We're not in no church. Who's that, Brian? Brian, it's your turn. You was there laughing?
No, I was just thinking about, can y'all hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the character that Will was talking about. I mean, not the character, the connection that Will was talking about. I was thinking about what the Yahusha revealed to the Samaritan woman. He said, Yahuah is a spirit, and those who worship him must worship him in Ruach and in truth. And that's how our connection is the Ruach.
Absolutely.
And really, like, without the Ruach, Yahusha wouldn't be able to do any of the miracles or anything. You see the Ruach in creation. The Ruach hovered over the waters, and then Yahuwah spoke, and it's like you're seeing that oneness is the Ruach, and we all have that Ruach within us, which makes us one in Mashiach, and one with the Father. And without that, there is no oneness at all. And so, yeah, that's what I think about. The Ruach is what makes us one. Yeah.
Hallelujah, Brian. That is excellent. It is by the Ruach that we are connected to Yah, that we are connected to his son. Absolutely. Without the Ruach, the Messiah wouldn't be able to even speak the words that the Father had, but he gave him his Ruach so he can speak. That's why Messiah says, the words that I speak, they're not from me. They're from my Father. Why? Because he was connected by the Ruach. So when it says about us that he's going to use us to speak, Matthew chapter 10, verse 20, where it says that they're going to take you before kings. And it says, do not think of what you would say for that very hour. Yah will give you the words to say. And he says that the spirit of your Father will give you the words. You know, the Ruach will give you the words to speak. So that is what makes us one. That's even what makes us one with each other. We can't be one with each other without the Ruach. We can't be connecting with each other without the Ruach. That doesn't make sense. You know what I mean? We have to have the Ruach, or we're going to be fighting with each other, you know, bumping heads, you know. I don't want to mention any more descriptions. Brian's.
Flipping tables.
Brian. All right. All right. Will, go ahead, brother.
Hey man, I'm with Brian, man. I'm a Trekkie, man. I love all that Star Wars stuff. Don't mess with me. You know, something that comes to mind, and you probably know the verses. Isn't there like a spirit in us and a soul in our body?
That
isn't there a scripture on that?
That is, you know what?
Yeah.
Let's finish this chapter in Hebrews and let's go directly into that. All right. Let's finish these last verses and then we'll go directly into that, because that's a good question. That's a good question, and that's a good question to talk about, because we just talk about the spirit of God, of Yah. We should talk about the spirit of a man. So we'll get into that tonight. Join in.
By design. That's like by design.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. No. Absolutely. Absolutely. What you're saying is absolutely correct. But we're gonna see what that design is in a second. All right. So back to Hebrews chapter 8. Right. We're gonna read the last 7 verses of Hebrews chapter 8. So we see that the excellent ministry that he had wasn't something that he's starting brand new. This is something that was established the moment that sin occurred. That the promises that were made was the promises that was made the moment that sin occurred. The restoration, the ministry that he has went by sections. He came to this earth to be a sacrifice. He wasn't a sacrifice before. He's not a sacrifice now. So the ministry, there's ministry aspects that he is obtaining to this whole thing that he's doing. So when it says that he obtained a more excellent ministry, this is not talking about a brand new ministry. He's talking about a new part to the ministry that he has been doing since man has fell. This is verse 6. So now I'm going to read the last verses from verse 7 to verse 13. All right. Verse 7 says, because if the first had been faultless, it says covenant. The first covenant had been faultless, then should no place have been sought for a second. Watch this. Nor finding fault with them. Oh, for finding fault with them, he said, behold, the days come, saith Yah, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. Not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day that I took them by the hand, led them out of the land of Egypt, because they continued not in my covenant, and I regarded them not. That's a very important verse right there. Saith Yah. For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, saith Yah. I will put my laws into their minds and write them in their hearts, and I will be to them a Elohim, and they shall be to me a people. And they shall not teach every man his neighbor and every man his brother, saying, know Yah, for all shall know me, from the least to the greatest. For I will be merciful unto their unrighteousness, and their sins and their iniquities will I remember no more. Remember, Isaiah 59:2. It's the sins and iniquities that separated us, and now he's not going to remember those sins and iniquities anymore, bringing us back together. Verse 13, it says, in that he says that a new covenant he have made the first old. So you see, the old one doesn't occur until the new one is accepted. It says, now that which is decayed and waxed old is ready to vanish away. So we have to understand what makes something old, what makes an agreement old, and what makes an agreement new. We're going to break that down. Let me let Wesley go. Go ahead, Wesley.
Oh, no. You break that down. No, break it down. Break it down. I was just gonna talk about verse 10, but you break that down first.
Oh, okay. So the covenant that's expressed here comes from Jeremiah chapter 31, verse 33. All right, this is where the location of it was. So when you look at the nature of the covenant, where it says, I will put my laws into their mind and write them into their hearts, this is something that's written in the Torah. The Torah speaks about letting Yah put it in our hearts and in our minds. You know what I mean? Matter of fact, he says to write, to bind them as frontlets before our eyes. You know, he expresses that he wants to circumcise our hearts and the hearts of our seed. So all of these things is actually located in the Torah as well. So what is this constant promise to do it again? Promise to reiterate this? Well, when you look at verse 8, it says that he found fault with them. He found fault with them. So what is changing? Is the covenant changing, or the covenant that he has with them changing? One of the problems is located right here in verse 9. It says, not according to the covenant I made with their fathers in the day that I took them by the hand and led them out of the land of Egypt, because, you see, don't stop there. Because they say, oh, it's not that same covenant, because he says not that same covenant. No. It says it's not that same covenant because they continued not in my covenant. It didn't say that he was changing it because it's time for a brand new covenant. No, he's changing them because they didn't continue. He's giving a new one because they didn't continue in the one he gave before. And then it says when you enter into the new one, The old one is then referred to as old and vanishing away. So when you break the covenant, you are in a old covenant. Let me say this in contract terms. If I make a contract or a legal agreement with you, and I break the legal agreement with you, the agreement that we have is void until I make a new agreement with you. Because you broke the agreement,
Right.
there's no agreement between me and you. There's no covenant between me and you. So in order for us to have a covenant, I have to give you a new one. And it can say the same exact thing. It can express the same exact promise. But this time, let's say I'm going to make an agreement with you. I'm going to put this in your heart. You then try to do it yourself, or you try to get your own tools and fix my house. And I say, you know what? You broke the covenant. My covenant was not that you fix my house. My covenant was that I use you to fix my house, or I give you the tools to fix my house. And you went and got your own stuff and messed up my house. So now we'll have another contract in which I will reiterate the same promises. I will give you the tools to fix the house. So we're entering into a renewed covenant, because remember, there's only an everlasting covenant. So when we break the everlasting covenant, there's no connection between me and the person I made an agreement with anymore. This is why it says here in verse, when you look at verse 9, Hebrews chapter 8, verse 9, it says, not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day when I took them by the hand and led them out of the land of Egypt, because they continued not in my covenant. What did it say after? And I regarded them not. You know what that's saying? When you don't regard someone, does that mean that they're your people? He said that you didn't keep my covenant, so therefore I did not regard you. You see, most people are thinking that he's still regarding people that's not in a covenant with him. No, he's not regarding you. Just because he's showing mercy to you doesn't mean he's regarding you as his people. You know, just because he's making manna fall every single day doesn't mean that they're in his good graces and they're his people. You see, so it says that they did not continue in my covenant and I regarded them not. That's very important to grasp when talking about the dynamic of an actual covenant. When you break a covenant, there's no more agreement until we restore the agreement again. You see what I'm saying? So this is what's happening here. You broke my covenant. I don't regard you. I am showing you mercy because I took you out of Egypt. I'm keeping your clothes not wearing. I'm giving you food in the morning and in the night. I'm doing all these things out of mercy. But until you enter into my covenant, that's when I can regard you as my people, which is why we see that the whole next generation was the only people that was able to go into the promised land, because the covenant couldn't go to those first set of people because they did not enter back into that covenant. And I'm not going to say everybody didn't. Maybe some did and died. I don't know. All I know is that the whole generation died in the wilderness because they broke the covenant. And I look at Moshe and say that this is a possibility as well. Moshe broke the covenant as well, which is why he could not go into the promised land. But he definitely repented, and I believe he definitely was forgiven. And though he was not able to enter into that physical land at that time, he was able to reconcile with Yah. So that's what I believe other people were able to do as well. But even though he didn't regard them collectively as his people, he still allowed individuals who wanted to give their heart to him and come back into repentance. Let me see. Go ahead, Wesley.
I wanted to talk about verse 10, but it also backs up what you're saying too. when we're talking about it's a renewed covenant, it's not talking about it's a brand new, something never seen before, but a renewed one due to the fact that in verse 10, when it says, "For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, saith Yahuah. I will put my laws into their mind and write them in their hearts, and I will be to them a God, and they shall be to me a people." And then if you go to, well, we don't have to read them because it's actually quite a bit, but Jeremiah 31:33, Jeremiah 32:40, Ezekiel 11:19, Ezekiel 36:26-27.
Let's read
Yep,
some.
I'm not gonna read, but
All right, let's do
they
32.
all say the same exact thing.
You said Jeremiah 32 what?
Jeremiah, there's Jeremiah 31:33.
31.
And then there's also Jeremiah 32:40.
All right, let's read those two then. Well, Jeremiah 31, verse 31. It says, "Not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day that I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, which my covenant they break, although I was a husband unto them." So now that's a deeper separation. He said they broke my covenant even though I was a husband unto them. That's a unfaithfulness separation between a husband and a wife type of thing. But this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, saith Yah. I will put my law in their inward parts, write it in their hearts, and will be their Elohim, and they shall be my people. And you said chapter 32, verse what? 40?
32 verse 40.
Jeremiah 32, verse 40, "And I will make an everlasting covenant with them, that I will not turn away from them to do them good, but I will put my fear in their hearts, that they shall not depart from me. Yea, I will rejoice." All those who have accepted this, we can see the prophets have accepted this, the fear of Yah in their hearts. But it says that I will put it in your hearts, that I will not turn away from them. It doesn't negate the free will that they have to turn away from him. You see the promise? This is where the promise becomes so beautiful, because it's relying on our free will, freedom of choice to abide. He will promise to do these things if we abide, if we stay. If we stay, he will do those things. But if we do not stay, he will not do that as well. JP, in the place to be.
Yeah, I just wanted to emphasize that in like going back to verse 10. It says, "For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel."
Right.
And I'm just emphasizing on the house of Israel because, a lot of times it's like, well, we're this or we're that or whatever label that people put themselves under, and not say you're of the house of Israel, because and it's almost like it's a must. This is a must. Like if you're not of the house of Israel, then the covenant here that we're speaking of doesn't really concern you. You know what I mean? Because now you're just not in the covenant. Like it says it's for the house of Israel. So
No, absolutely.
I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there's other scriptures pertaining to that, but I just want to emphasize on that. I thought that was important.
Do not say you don't know, brother. You know. This is the covenant. What covenant did he say? This is the covenant that I will make with the house of the Gentiles and with the house of the nations. Like, no, the nations have to come to him. Even Israel have to come to him. So it now brings us to an element of who is Israel? Is Israel the people? Even the Israelites have to come to him. So who is Israel? Israel is the firstborn. If Messiah is the head and we're the body, if he's the vine and we're the branches, then he is ultimately Israel. And you can only be in Israel if you're in Messiah. You know what I mean? You can be related to Israel. You could be related. That doesn't make you, well, Paul already explained that in Romans chapter 9. Just because you're related doesn't make you a part of his people. You know what I mean? That's something very important to grasp. Just because you're related doesn't make you a part of his people. You have to have the Ruach that connects you, like what Brian was saying. The Ruach is what makes you his people. for him to regard you and keep his promises for you. That ruach is how his promises becomes fulfilled in you and in your life. You know, so yeah, that covenant is with Israel. We're grafted in by his ruach, right? We're grafted into his ruach, and it's funny because it says that the natural branches, which is the bloodline relatives, needs to be grafted back in as well. So everybody's branches. So who's the tree? The tree cannot be the people. The branch, everybody's the branches, but that's what Messiah says. I'm the vine, you the branches. Everybody's the branch. Whether you're an olive branch or you're a wild olive branch, you're still a branch. You still got to be connected to me. Without me, you can do nothing. That's what he says in John chapter 15. You know what I mean? So Messiah, that's why he says Messiah, he said, Israel is my firstborn. Like Israel is a reflection of Messiah. We're the fruit, right? We're the fruit that he bears on this earth. We're the fruit that he wants to basically show the world. Let the world see and get a taste from the fruit that the branches bear. You know, that's us. But we're not the tree. We're not the tree, and we shouldn't be claiming to be the tree. We're only the branches. That's what Scripture says. You know what I mean? Messiah is the vine. He's the root. He's the tree. He's where the branches come from. And then we got the husbandman, which fertilizes the root, which gives the strength and the thing that's needed and puts it into the root and the vine. You know. The Father is that. The Father is the husbandman. The Messiah is the vine, and we are the branches. Go ahead, Will.
Yeah, that's interesting. I just want to go over three things here real quick. But real quick on that, I kind of see I see the Father as the main trunk and the main tree, and then the vine, and then the branch. Sort of how I
Yeah, I mean
that order of things.
Yeah.
The order of coexist. I mean, he's got to be the root,
the root,
tree,
right?
The root, then the branch, and then the vine.
Right.
But yeah, man, that's beautiful right there. But just like we're going over this verse 19 here, there's another version here, NHEB, and to support, kind of where you was heading on when it comes to. I'll read it real quick. It says, "And not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day that I took them by the hand to lead them out of the land of Egypt, for they did not continue in my covenant." And then it says, comma, and then it says, "And I disregarded them," says our Lord. That's the way they got it. So even in this version right here, it says, "I disregarded them."
Right.
I just wanted to share that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But in verse 11, I was not aware of this, but as soon as you read this, it took me to Matthew 5:18, and I'll read what I'm trying to say here. They will not, verse 11. They will not teach each one of his fellow citizens, this version, and each one of his brothers, saying, "Know the Lord," for all will know me, for the least of them to the greatest of them. Took me back to Matthew 5:18. Whoever teaches, we can go to that, but I think you know where I'm going with it. I'll go back to that.
Whosoever break one of the least.
Yeah, from the most to the least in Matthew 5:18, I believe it says that. Whoever teaches.
Yeah, verse 19, "Whosoever shall break one of the least commandments and shall teach them so, he shall be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. Whosoever shall do and teach them, the same shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven."
Does anybody else see a connection here between these two? Or am I?
Does anybody see the connection? I know that the least to the greatest, it says nobody will teach them. But the Ruach will teach, right? Where are we? Verse 11, Hebrews 8:11, they shall not teach every man his neighbor, every man his brother, saying, know Yah, for all shall know me, from the least to the greatest. Now, this is referring to the Ruach teaching all men, from the least to the greatest. So in Matthew 5, it says that those who break the commandments and teach men to do so, they will be the least in the in the kingdom. Well, this verse says that that everybody's gonna know him because he's going to be their teacher, right? Nobody's gonna teach each other. The Ruach is gonna teach from the least to the greatest. But if the least in Matthew 5:19 is breaking the commandment and teaching men to break the commandment, I can't say that they know Yahuwah, because that's not what the Ruach teaches. It's not what the Spirit teaches. Spirit won't teach you to break law. I think it's referring just to like when you look at the body, when it talks about the body of Messiah, and it talks about that there's different parts of the body, and then it mentions that there's a least part, and then there's a great part, there's a sensitive part, and then there's a strong part. You know what I mean? And it says that everybody has his own place. I think it's talking about that aspect, the least to the greatest of the body of Messiah. But I think Matthew 5:19, that's a different least. That's not a person that is led by the Ruach. This is what I see. That's my perspective, because I think what it could be connecting to, where it says John the Baptist was great, and then it says even the least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than John the Baptist. I think that may have a connection. But Matthew 5:19, I don't know. Like this right here, Matthew 5:19, this right here where it says, whosoever therefore shall break one of the least commandments and shall teach men so, he shall be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. To me, I can't, based off of the collective group of scripture, I can't see that this person who's breaking the commandments and then teaching men to break the commandments ending up in the kingdom anyway. I don't see that. I see that you see what I'm saying? Like I see the least in the kingdom not really meaning that you're gonna be there. Like,
well, can I just chime in on a verse?
Yeah, of course. I know what you mean, Will. I can't definitively say that with this verse. I can take a whole lot of other verses, but this verse, I can't. I have to find another verse that talks about the least.
It says they will be called the least in the kingdom.
Well, I'm just gonna.
Okay, so in the kingdom they will be called the least, not necessarily like they would be in the kingdom.
Yeah.
Okay, I like that one. Will has now saved me from this torment.
Well, hold on a second.
Nah,
hold on a second.
I'm taking it, Will. You did it. You helped us. Sorry, Wesley. Go ahead, Wesley.
No, I just wanted to throw in a verse for Matthew 5:19, and it's 1 Samuel 2, 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 30. And it says, wherefore Yahuwah God of Israel saith, I said indeed that thy house and the house of thy father should walk before me forever. But now, Yahuwah saith, be it far from me, for them that honor me will I honor, and they that despise me shall be lightly esteemed. So it's practically saying kind of the same lines as least, kind of calling almost least lightly esteemed. And we know that those who despise him, he doesn't regard them. So it's actually, it's not saying they'll be in heaven. I know we agree on that. It's not saying they'll be in the kingdom, but it's definitely showing that they'll be lightly esteemed. They will not be regarded.
Oh, I like that connection
So
there.
anyway, I just wanted to throw that one out there because that's where my mind went. I said, you know what? Let me introduce this one to the fellas. That one's that's a tricky one there. That's a tricky one.
That's a tricky one. I like what Wesley said, and I like what your Bible said too about that they broke the covenant, so he disregarded them. So imagine somebody breaking the commandments and teaching others to break the commandments. How is he not disregarding them? But the least in the kingdom, I believe, it sounds similar to what it says here in 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 30, like what Wesley said. It says, be it far from me, for them that honor me, I will honor. They that despise me shall be lightly esteemed. I think the terminology, we're looking for a terminology like destroyed, removed. Like we're looking for that terminology. And it may be that the terminology least in the kingdom or lightly esteemed is not talking about, gently,
Something good.
yeah, lightly, or something soft when it comes to
Because
disregarding.
you have the example like in Hebrews chapter 8 where it says that he didn't regard them because they broke the covenant, which is also pretty much despising him.
Well,
Right.
that one's specific there. See, that's what I'm saying. Like that one you just mentioned there. That one is specifically, without a doubt, saying what it does, opposed to these other ones, the ones that you introduced. So I don't know, brothers.
Yeah.
Gotta pray on that one.
This is pretty good. Look, so lightly esteemed. Despise me, be lightly esteemed. I see that you can't really honor Yah and break his commandments. We'll look at
Some sort of consideration of some sort of
mercy in Matthew 5. Let me look at it. JP, go ahead, brother. You was gonna say something?
Yeah, go ahead. Well, I was gonna ask, I see that we made out of House of Israel, but then in verse 8 it says House of Judah. It says a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah out of Hebrews. So I was thinking, was Messiah from the tribe of Judah? Or what would that, I guess the question would let me just leave it at that, was what do we make out of that? I already got the good, I take the what we had said from the house of Israel, but here we see, and it says, and with the house of Judah. Let me just leave it.
Right. Well, because there was a separation in Israel during the time of Solomon, where Israel, or 10 tribes of Israel, went left, and then the 2 tribes stayed. The tribe of Levi and the tribe of Judah stayed in Jerusalem. So Israel will be referring to the 10 tribes, and Judah will be referring to Levi and Judah that stayed in Jerusalem. It's also, they were all scattered, so it's kind of like there still is a separation that has never been restored. Like there's never been a restoration of the 10 and the 2 tribes. So we see that the Messiah is emphasizing on a complete restoration, like a complete connection. They were never restored before, so he's gonna collectively restore everything. Especially the emphasis of Israel and Judah is the emphasis of the disconnect of his people. And what he's going to do is he's going to bring his people all together and have one people under this covenant. So Judah will be referring to, I believe it's the southern kingdom, and the northern kingdom is Israel, which is the 10 tribes. That split happened during the time of Solomon, where Jeroboam was put in charge of the 10 tribes and taken away because he basically was Solomon was worshiping other gods.
That's when that happened, right about that time, huh?
Yep.
Time frame.
Yep. Solomon was a crazy man. Go ahead, Nate. Nate.
I'm sorry, I'm got the lights off trying to hit the button. About what you were just saying, since Shimon and Levi didn't have any inheritance, I know we always say the 10 are at the north and then Judah and Benjamin at the south, but wouldn't they have been all over themselves? Those
You mean you said that
because Simon and Levi, when they killed the guy that raped their sister, correct?
of the at Shechem?
Yeah, and then they didn't get an inheritance. So I thought Simon and Levi were scattered all over the place.
No, I think Simon or Simeon did get an inheritance. I believe that I believe the only tribe that didn't get an inheritance was Levi.
Levi's, right?
Right.
Because it gives the breakdown that they were the only ones left. Speak of it, the tithing.
Right.
Yeah, well, not the time, just that their own speck of land. But hold on, I'm sorry, I should have been. Go ahead, because I can't find it right now, and I'm not in my right state.
All right.
Oh yeah, Genesis 9, 5 and 7.
Genesis 45.
49.
I think that's
yeah.
I think that's
49, 5 through 7. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel.
Let me check some stuff out. Let me let only
because I was going through stuff about I'm sorry, about that chart, and that was one of the things that I found was like, well, that can't be, because they were saying, they say that's Haiti because of their cruel instruments. But I'm like, well, it can't, it's because they killed. At least that's what I found, because they killed the guy. That's the instrument of cruelty, not, after they were circumcised, that's when they attacked them. Not, but anyway, that was just a question I had.
Yeah. I'm gonna look up some stuff. I'm gonna let JP and Wesley go. I'm gonna look up, see if I can find anything on that. Go ahead, JP.
Well, I was just wanting to read Ezekiel chapter 11. Wesley had mentioned it earlier, but I mean, I thought it was a very good portion. 16 probably to 21, if you don't mind. I mean, it pertains to the law being written in the heart. Us also be scattered.
You said Ezekiel chapter what?
Ezekiel chapter 11, verse 16 to 21.
Okay, yeah, go ahead. I thought you meant chapter 16 to chapter 21. All right, go ahead.
Nah. It says, therefore say, thus saith my sovereign Yahuah, although I have cast them far off among the heathen, and although I have scattered them among the countries, yet will I be to them as a little sanctuary in the countries where they shall come. Therefore say, thus saith my sovereign Yahuah, I will even gather you from the people and assemble you out of the countries where you have been scattered, and I will give you the land of Israel. And they shall come thither, and they shall take away all the detestable things thereof, and all the abominations thereof from thence. And I will give them one heart, and I will put a new spirit within you, and I will take the stony heart out of their flesh, and will give them a heart of flesh, that they may walk in my statutes and keep mine ordinances and do them, and they shall be my people, and I will be their Elohim. But as for them whose heart walketh after the heart of their detestable things and their abominations, I will recompense their way upon their heads, saith my sovereign Yahuwah. And I just felt like it all that took a lot of portion of what we just read out of the Hebrews about the scattering, about the heart, the law being written in their heart, and us being a people, you know.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. So we see the context or the character that's involved in the person who's serving Yah and the person who's disregarding Yah. They will be disregarded. Now that makes sense. Nate is actually right. So the tribe of Simeon or Shimon didn't have its own lot of land. What happened was that the lot of Judah was so large that he gave a portion of his lot to Simeon. So Simeon didn't receive his own lot. He received a portion of Judah's lot. That's interesting.
Okay.
That's interesting, though.
Who was Simeon again?
One of the tribes, one of the sons of Simeon. Simeon was the other brother. Him and Levi went into that town that was circumcised, and then in order to marry Dinah, Jacob's daughter, and Jacob said that they have to be circumcised if they want to join in to the family. And when they were circumcised, Levi and Simeon, the two sons of Jacob, went in there and killed every single man there.
What was the scripture you gave about the inheritance? I'm sorry, I walked away to get some tea.
There's two. There's Joshua chapter 19, verse 1 to 9, and then there's Joshua chapter 21 as well.
Okay, thanks.
All right, Wesley, go ahead, brother.
I know I'm going back here to Matthew chapter 5, verse 19, but I just saw something interesting I thought I can share.
Okay.
Real quick. So I was looking at 1 Samuel 2:30, where it calls them lightly esteemed those who despise. Right. And not only multiple places in scripture, those who despise Yahuwah or his commandments or his statutes, they have a curse or a judgment upon them. But if you look up the word in Hebrew for lightly esteemed, which I'm not even going to try to pronounce it because I can't, majority of the time it's used in a very negative manner, such as cursed or curse or vile or despised, accused, afflicted, contempt, found in contempt. So just bringing it back to even though it says lightly esteemed, it's not something that's good to be. So bring it back to Matthew chapter 5, at least in the kingdom, being called that is not good. Yeah.
Right. Right. Because if I say lightly esteemed, I think in our English language, it would mean just a person who is not as esteemed as another person. You know, like a person is less esteemed when it's actually meaning not esteemed at all. You see, so lightly esteemed is not something. It doesn't mean that they're receiving less esteem, but they're receiving no esteem. They're being cursed. So when a person is the least in the kingdom, for breaking the commandments.
Well, there's examples of that in Leviticus 26, and it even says curse, which is the same definition.
The same Hebrew word.
Yeah. So, okay. And it did that because they broke, I think Leviticus 26 even says despise too. So let me see if I go to it. But yeah, no, sorry for bringing it back.
No, it's all right.
Right. Sorry, I added in there.
Okay.
Line upon line, precept upon precept.
That's right. That's how we do it here.
Yeah, it's just the way it's worded, and the way that
Yeah.
in word right there.
Oh, but look at
least
this.
in.
Look at this though. I agree with Wes, but let's look at that. Then no buts. But I agree with Wes, but I said but again. Matthew chapter 5, 19. But this time 19 and 20. So remember, the Pharisees was breaking the commandments. They were breaking the commandments. And then they were teaching men to keep the commandments that they created instead of the commandments that Yah set up in the Torah. That's what Messiah said in Matthew 15. That they're teaching the doctrines of men as commandments of God. So when you look at verse 19, whosoever shall break one of the least of the commandments and shall teach men so, he shall be called the least of the kingdom of heaven. But whosoever shall do and teach them, the same shall be called the great in the kingdom of heaven. In verse 20, it says, for I say to you that except your righteousness shall exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, which broke the commandments and taught other people to do so, you shall in no way enter into the kingdom of heaven.
So right there even shows the context. So
Right.
again, line upon line.
So verse 20 is telling you that the Pharisees was teaching men to break the commandments. And then it says, if you do not exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, you will not enter into the kingdom of heaven.
So that least, in other words, shall be called none.
It should, for us.
Which word is different.
Right. If we're not, because this is 1611 English. This is not 2019 English. So I'm not sure the phrasing, how they use certain phrases is not. We don't use the same type of phrases in our language. I know that there's a lot of words that in our language is the exact opposite. Like in the King James Version, it says, he that lets will let until he is removed out of the way. That word let means to stop. But when we say let, it means to allow. So the King James says let and it means stop. We say let and it means to allow. So that it changes things.
Well, you
Or
also have the word hope.
the word hope, which the word hope that we use has doubt. It's like, oh, I hope it doesn't rain tomorrow. But in the Bible, the word hope actually means like assurance,
confidence.
Like there's no doubt in it. So the way that the way that we use certain words is not the way that that they use certain words when they wrote the King James Bible. Doesn't mean that it's wrong. It just means that the language is now, English. The language is evolved into.
Yeah, right. It goes. So in other words, a word can have several different meanings.
Right.
You need to pay attention.
Right. It could mean one thing at that time, and now it means something else. So if we read it with the way that we use the word, it's not going to apply correctly in the verse. Unfortunately. That's why we do the context is the safety.
Yeah, 20, verse 20. Yeah, which the context of this scenario here is verse 20.
Right. Definitely. Because Matthew 15 shows you that Messiah was pointing out that they were making the commandments of Yah void by teaching them to do something else. So Matthew 15 tells you that they were doing that. They were breaking the commandments and teaching men to break the commandments. But here it says, if you don't exceed these guys, you're not going to get into the kingdom. So, all right. So Hebrews chapter 8, I think that we kind of covered the difficult verses that regard this idea of a brand new covenant coming out and an old one being tossed to the side. But we see that in verse 13 of Hebrews 8, this is going to be the last verse. Verse 13 of Hebrews 8, it says, and it is said that a new covenant he have made the first old. Now that which decays and wax old is ready to vanish away. So if I have a voided contract with you because I broke my side of the contract, then we remain in a broken contract until we renew our contract. You see what I'm saying? So if we have a covenant with Yah and we break the covenant with Yah, we remain in a broken covenant with Yah until we renew the covenant with Yah. So,
put in our hearts.
right, which he told them he wanted to at Sinai. Matter of fact, let's take a look at a couple verses before we close this. Study. Couple verses from the Torah. Couple verses from the Torah showing us that he wants to write to deal with our hearts. Let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 11, verse 13. I'm gonna do like a rapid reading of these things. Deuteronomy 11, verse 13. And it shall come to pass, if you shall hearken diligently unto my commandments, which I command you this day, to love Yah, your Elohim, and to serve him with all your heart and all your soul. Verse 11, Deuteronomy 11, verse 18. Therefore shall you lay up these words in your heart and in your soul, and bind them for a sign upon your hand, that they may be as frontlets between your eyes. So he says, lay these words up in your heart.
Yep.
Let's see, I'm trying to get specific ones. Okay, well, pretty sure there's more. Deuteronomy 5:29. Oh, that there were such a heart in them that they would fear me, keep all my commandments always, that it may be well with them and their children forever. And he says in Deuteronomy 6, verse 6, and these words which I command you this day shall be in your heart. Yeah, so we see that this was the plan the whole time, to put it in the heart of man. So it's not, this is not a new promise.
Right, and even with Abraham, when because Abraham has obeyed my laws, commandments. That verse, I don't know it off the top of my head.
Yeah.
But right there,
yeah.
Just know that he had him. Abraham had him in his heart too.
Right. Absolutely. That's Genesis 26:5. It says, because that Abraham obeyed my voice, kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. You know, so. But yeah, this concludes. Huh?
No tablets back then.
That's right. Just the heart. All right. So this concludes Hebrews chapter 8.